A 70-year-old couple in a poor rural area is suddenly faced with the responsibility of raising a 6-month-old baby with Autism Spectrum Disorder who was found in a garbage dump. What hardships or miracles will come to them next? Welcome back to the next story of Animal Dream Story. Subscribe to the channel and begin this fascinating tale right away. A baby's cry breaks the tranquil dawn in the rolling hills of rural Beattyville. An elderly couple, Grace and Tom Miller, both in their 70s, were going about their morning routine. At first, Grace, busy cooking a pot of hot oatmeal, paid little attention to the sound, while Tom, who was slowly sifting through a small box of old screws and nails in preparation for repairing a broken chair, assumed it might be a stray cat rummaging through the trash. But then the noise grew louder, its tone reminiscent of a faint, desperate cry. Grace's heart pounded as she stood in the doorway, ladle in hand, listening intently. They decided to follow the sound together, walking around the side of the house toward a small row of bushes and then down a dirt road leading to the local dump. There they finally found the source of the noise, a neatly placed cardboard box beside the landfill. When they opened it, they were shocked to see a baby, about 6 months old, wrapped in only a thin blanket and lying next to a few faded baby clothes. The baby's cheeks were red, likely from the cold morning air. Without hesitation, Grace picked the baby up, tears welling in her eyes. Tom looked around frantically, searching for any sign of the person who might have abandoned the child. But there was no one in sight. They turned to each other, their faces full of surprise and etched with the wrinkles of a life marked by hardship. Yet their eyes sparkled with a kindness unique to those who have experienced both joy and sorrow. Having raised 3 children of their own, now grown and living in other towns, tucked beneath the bundle of the baby's blanket was a handwritten letter. Grace's hand trembled as she unfolded the note. "Dear whoever finds my son, my name is not important, and I'm sorry I can't take care of Oliver. I'm still in college, a second-year student with no money and no means to give him the life he deserves. Please forgive me for leaving him here. I hope you can take care of him and give him a chance at a better future. I choose my own future so I can someday help him if possible. Please love the child, which I cannot do. A desperate mother." Grace and Tom exchanged glances. They could see genuine heartbreak in each other's eyes. They had never anticipated being parents again at their age, let alone to a child left behind like a discarded item. Before we continue with the story, do you think the 70-year-olds, Grace and Tom, would take the risk to adopt that baby? Please comment below and don't forget to like and subscribe. It's very important to us. Thank you very much, and let's get back to the story now. They were completely shocked and worried, as well as feeling a sense of responsibility weighing down on them. Tom, ever the realist, worried about what it would mean to take in a baby at their age. Grace, with her nurturing heart, was thinking only of the child's immediate needs: warmth, food, and comfort. They called the local authorities to report what had happened, and an officer arrived soon after to file the necessary paperwork. There was little information about the mother, only the note and a single sheet of signed guardianship papers that came with the baby, indicating that Grace and Tom would have the right to care for him. It was all very confusing, but after some hurried calls, the social service worker told them that until further notice, Grace and Tom could be the child's temporary guardians. They were asked if they were willing to take on the responsibility. "I know this is a lot to ask," the social worker said gently, "but the mother's note and these forms give you temporary custody. Are you okay with that?" Grace clutched the baby close, feeling his warmth against her chest. "Yes," she said quietly. "We'll take care of him." Tom nodded, though his expression was conflicted. Yet he didn't object. He held Grace's free hand and gave it a reassuring squeeze. Days turned into weeks. The baby, whom they decided to call Oliver, as stated in the note, became more a part of their lives. Neighbors marveled at the sight of Tom carrying a diaper bag on his shoulder, or Grace pushing a battered old stroller along the dirt roads. They knew it would be a challenge, especially given their limited finances and their own health concerns. But they were determined to give Oliver a loving home. Though Oliver was just 6 months old, he displayed signs that worried Grace and Tom. He seldom cooed or babbled in the way other infants did. He avoided eye contact and did not seem to respond to sounds. As Tom drives Grace, who is holding the baby, to a pediatrician's office 20 miles away, the doctor performs a general examination and concludes that the child may have autism spectrum disorder. The doctor explained that some children show early indicators: lack of typical babbling, limited social interaction, and seeming unresponsiveness to their environment. "You'll need to be patient," the doctor had said, "and you'll need some specialized support as he grows. We're here to help guide you through this." The official diagnosis was not fully confirmed, but the doctor asked them to be prepared. Tom and Grace, looking at each other, steeled themselves for the journey ahead. Despite their shock, they also felt a swelling of determination. Because they've been through so much in life, they can definitely handle this. That evening, after Grace put Oliver to sleep, she and her husband sat on the old chair in the living room. She said that before adopting the child, they had been able to get by on the meager government assistance and Tom's meager pension. But now that they needed an extra monthly sum for the baby's milk and diapers, they decided to occasionally go to the local dump to pick up anything they could resell. A piece of scrap metal here, an old appliance there. Grace had never imagined herself searching through garbage at 70, but Oliver's presence compelled her to push past her pride. The next morning, Grace contacted her 3 adult children, 2 daughters and a son, who lived in nearby cities. One after another, the adult children expressed shock at their parents' decision, some even judging them for complicating their twilight years with a new responsibility. Mom, Dad, their eldest daughter sighed over the phone. "I don't understand why you're doing this to yourselves. You can barely make ends meet. How can you manage a child with special needs?" Their middle child, a son, scolded Tom for chasing an impossible dream. Their youngest daughter was the most empathetic, but still offered little more than moral support. No one was willing to send money or help physically. Hearing their children's disapproval, an outright refusal to help stung, but Grace and Tom refused to let negativity overshadow the love they felt for Oliver. On one of Tom's regular visits to the landfill, he noticed a small bundle of fur trembling behind a rusted washing machine. Upon closer inspection, he realized it was a tiny puppy with large brown eyes. Its ribs were visible through its dingy coat, and the poor creature looked terrified and alone. In spite of knowing how tight money was, Tom could not bear to leave the puppy to starve. He picked it up gently, feeling the frantic beating of its heart against his palm. He brought the puppy home, unsure how Grace would react. But when she saw the frightened little creature in Tom's arms, her expression softened. Oliver, who was lying quietly in his makeshift crib, seemed oblivious at first. The puppy, which they named Charlie, was introduced carefully to the baby, but Oliver did not show much interest. Charlie, for his part, cowered behind Tom whenever Oliver cried. Over time, Charlie started to grow stronger and healthier, largely thanks to Grace's efforts to feed him scraps and leftover broth. The puppy would trot curiously around Oliver, sniffing the edges of the baby's blanket, then run off to Tom if Oliver so much as moved unexpectedly. The older couple noticed that Charlie became protective of their home, barking at the occasional visitor or neighbor who stepped too close to the front door. Initially, this was a nuisance. Some folks were startled by the dog's unwelcoming manner, but Tom couldn't help but feel a bit proud, seeing how seriously Charlie took his role as a newfound family member. But he had no idea that a miracle was about to happen in this small house. One night, Oliver spiked a sudden fever. He cried and fussed, his tiny body burning with heat. Panicked, Grace and Tom rushed him to the nearest hospital, a small facility about half an hour away. The pediatrician on duty recognized that something more serious might be going on, so they ran a series of tests, including some that looked into Oliver's hearing and neurological functions. When the doctor held the results in his hands and called them into the room to discuss and send the results, Mr. and Mrs. Miller were surprised when the doctor revealed that Oliver's hearing was better than they previously thought. The official view is that Oliver may still have autism spectrum disorder, but there was a possibility that some of the early symptoms could lessen or even resolve as he developed. Sometimes babies show red flags early on that turn out to be less severe than expected. He may very well learn to speak, and he might respond more to stimuli as he grows, the doctor said, though he cautioned them to remain patient and vigilant. Tom and Grace clung to this hope, their minds reeling at the possibility that Oliver's future might be brighter than they dared imagine. Leaving the hospital with Oliver sleeping peacefully in Grace's arms, Tom felt a renewed sense of purpose. Despite their hardships, the disapproval of their children, the meager government checks, the daily labor of salvaging at the landfill, they were willing to do anything for this boy. They would take each day as it came, celebrating small victories wherever they could find them. Back at home, Charlie continued to develop an unbreakable bond with Oliver. The puppy seemed to sense whenever Oliver was upset or restless, often lying near the crib as though standing guard. Grace was convinced Charlie had an almost sixth sense about Oliver, because the dog would appear at the slightest whimper, ears perked and body tense, ready to defend or comfort at a moment's notice. Late one evening, while Tom was finishing some paperwork to finalize Oliver's adoption, he heard a rustling coming from the baby's room. Rushing in, he found Oliver half awake, his arms stretching out toward the window. Oliver had managed to wriggle to the edge of the crib, close enough that a fall might have been dangerous, but Charlie, as if guided by pure instinct, had nosed the child gently back onto the mattress. Tom froze in the doorway, watching the puppy push Oliver away from the crib's edge with a gentle but determined motion of its snout. Realizing what might have happened had Charlie not intervened, Tom felt tears well in his eyes. He stepped forward, lifted Oliver gently, and cradled him. "Thank God for this little dog," Tom whispered, kneeling down and rubbing the dog's ears. Charlie wagged his tail uncertainly, still standing guard, his eyes flicking between the baby and Tom. Tom's tears overflowed as he carried Oliver into the living room and told Grace what had happened. They both gazed at Charlie, this once abandoned puppy who was already repaying their kindness by protecting Oliver in the most extraordinary way. That night, Tom insists that Charlie is not just a pet, but a protective member of this family. Little by little, Oliver began to show signs of improvement. He started to respond to voices, turning his head when Tom or Grace spoke his name. A few times, he even let out a joyful giggle when Charlie zoomed around the living room chasing a ball. At first, these breakthroughs were so subtle that if Tom or Grace blinked, they might miss them. But over the weeks, the improvements became clear and undeniable. "He's listening to us," Grace whispered one morning, tears gathering in the corners of her eyes as Oliver turned his head at the sound of her voice. "He can hear us." Tom nodded, swallowing a lump in his throat. "He's coming around." Each day brought new encouragement, the baby grasping at Grace's finger when she sang a lullaby, or babbling softly in response to Tom's gentle hushes. Charlie's presence, meanwhile, became an irreplaceable part of Oliver's development. The child would smile when the pup licked his chubby hands and squeal softly when the dog barked. By the time Oliver reached his first birthday, the Miller household had found a cheerful rhythm. Every morning, Grace would feed Oliver while Tom took Charlie for a quick walk near the property. Then they would gather in the living room, Oliver on a soft blanket on the floor, Charlie lazing comfortably beside him, while Tom and Grace planned out their day. Sometimes Tom would head to the landfill to see what could be salvaged. Other times, Grace would make jam or preserves to sell at the local farmer's market. Despite their limited income, they were happy. Their hearts felt full in a way they had not experienced in years. Oliver's love of music particularly stood out. He would break into wide smiles whenever Grace turned on the radio or hummed an old country tune. Tom even started bringing home battered guitars, pots, or any item that could make a tinkling noise, hoping to nurture Oliver's blossoming fascination with sound. Neighbors who once watched the old couple with skepticism began to show compassion. Miss Linda, who lived on the next farm over, started dropping off fresh eggs and milk every few days, claiming she had more than she needed. Another neighbor, Mr. Jenkins, brought extra vegetables from his garden, insisting that they were surplus. In truth, both neighbors wanted to help without wounding the miller's pride. Everyone could see the love that Tom and Grace poured into Oliver, and many found it inspiring. Word got around, and eventually, the couple's 3 adult children caught wind of Oliver's progress. They heard tales of how the baby giggled whenever Charlie chased after him, how he was learning to babble in short bursts, and how Tom and Grace seemed to be in high spirits despite their hardships. One by one, their grown children started visiting more often, albeit with some lingering doubt. The eldest daughter, Emma, came by unexpectedly one afternoon, bearing gifts of baby clothing and a small envelope of cash. "I'm sorry I didn't help sooner," she murmured, hesitantly hugging her mother. "I just didn't understand. But seeing Oliver, seeing how happy he is, I get it now." Their son, Michael, arrived the following week, bringing a small stack of diapers and a promise to help fix the leaky roof. Their youngest daughter, Annie, who lived the closest, came the most often. She would babysit Oliver while Grace and Tom took Charlie out for longer walks or ran errands. Slowly but surely, the Miller family grew closer, mending old wounds and forging new bonds around this tiny child who had come into their lives unexpectedly. One evening, with Oliver asleep and Charlie curled protectively at his side, the Millers and their children gathered in the living room. The lights were dim, a gentle lamp illuminating a small circle of warmth in the center of the old house. They reminisced about times long past, childhood memories, family traditions, and the challenges Tom and Grace had faced during their youth. Grace looked down at her hands and recalled the day they found Oliver. "He was so helpless," she said softly. "And we felt so helpless too, didn't we, Tom?" Tom nodded, his eyes watering. "But we couldn't leave him there. I kept thinking, no child should ever feel abandoned. If I were in that mother's position, I'd want someone to be there for my baby." The children, each in their own way, acknowledged the bravery it had taken. Emma sniffled, wiping away tears. "You've given that little boy a chance he might never have had. Even if it's hard, it's worth it." Looking over to where Oliver lay, Grace and Tom marveled at how quickly he had become the center of their universe. Though they had never learned the identity of his birth mother beyond her frantic letter, they silently thanked her for bringing Oliver into their lives. They wished her well, wherever she might be, hoping that one day she could see how far Oliver had come. Charlie lifted his head, sensing the hush in the room. His tail gave a few slow wags, as if he understood the depth of emotion in that moment. Gently, he stood and trotted over to Grace, resting his muzzle on her knee. She reached down and patted him lovingly. That night, the Miller family talked for hours, forging a renewed commitment to each other and to Oliver's future. They might not have had much money, but they possessed something far more valuable: unwavering love and dedication. But little did they know a great miracle was about to happen. The next morning, Oliver's second birthday, Grace took her child to a small supermarket near home to buy some things for the birthday party. She also took her dog Charlie for a walk. When she arrived at the supermarket, Grace was busy choosing a birthday cake. Her 2-year-old child noticed a ball rolling out the door. The boy chased after the ball. The ball continued to roll out, rolling across the road outside the supermarket. When the child ran to the middle of the road, a young man drove at high speed, preparing to hit the boy. At that moment, Charlie saw Oliver and ran with all his might. Like a thoroughbred horse galloping, he rushed forward and pushed the boy to the side of the road. He and the boy rolled a few more times before being blocked by a tree on the side of the road. Grace saw this scene. She ran to hug the boy and the dog. She cried loudly when she learned that Charlie was only slightly injured and the child was fine. Grace said thank you to the dog and silently thanked God for bringing them a miracle. That evening, their neighbors joined in the birthday party, bringing homemade pies, fresh bread, and even a small cake for the little boy. Oliver, eyes wide and excited, clapped along to the tune of Happy Birthday, while Charlie barked excitedly beside him, his tail wagging in perfect rhythm. In that moment, Grace emotionally told everyone at the party the whole story of this morning. Tom shed tears, patted the dog's head, silently thanking him for protecting the child. The neighbors from this moment on had a completely different view of Charlie. He only growled when strangers approached, but with his family, he was completely protective. As the years slipped by, Oliver grew stronger, Charlie grew bigger, and the Miller household evolved in beautiful, unexpected ways. The child who had been found abandoned by the landfill was now the center of a warm, bustling family. Beattyville itself took notice. Occasionally, folks driving through the town would mention the Miller family with admiration, pointing out how Grace and Tom, despite their advanced age, had opened their hearts to a child who needed them the most. Their story even reached the local newspaper once, a short piece titled, "A Beacon of Hope in Beattyville." Though the Millers never sought attention or praise, the article led a few charitable organizations to send small donations or resources for children with special needs. Each box that arrived felt like a small miracle, filled with items like therapeutic toys or specialized books aimed at early childhood development. Meanwhile, Oliver's mother remained an enigma. The woman who had written that heartbreaking letter never reappeared, though Grace often wondered about her. Had she graduated college? Was she healthy? Did she think of her son every day? Some nights, Grace even prayed that the young mother had found peace with her decision. She hoped, too, that if the mother ever wanted to know about Oliver, she would discover that her boy was loved beyond measure. On a brisk morning, just before Oliver's 3rd birthday, Tom and Grace sat on the porch, sipping tea. Charlie curled at Tom's feet, eyes half closed as he soaked in the gentle sun rays. Inside the house, Oliver's laughter echoed as he played with Annie, who had come by for a visit. Grace turned to Tom, her eyes shining. "We never would have guessed our lives would take this turn, would we?" Tom shook his head, smiling fondly. But I wouldn't change it for the world." They both gazed out over the farmland, recalling the many trials they had endured, their children's initial reluctance, the crushing financial strain, the fear that Oliver might never speak or truly connect with them. Yet here they were, 3 years later, with a vibrant boy who was blossoming more each day, a loyal dog who had saved Oliver from that near-disastrous accident, and a supportive community that rallied around them. A few moments later, Oliver toddled out onto the porch, Annie following close behind to ensure he didn't trip. He spotted Tom and Grace and raised his little arms, as if requesting to be held. Grace scooped him up, hugging him tight. Oliver patted her cheek and then giggled at Charlie, who jumped up to give Oliver's hand a gentle lick. "You want your drum, sweet boy?" Grace asked softly. Oliver nodded, pointing inside, and Annie went to fetch the makeshift drum. Oliver banged on it happily, producing a soft thud, thud, thud that set Charlie's tail wagging. Tom joined in by clapping along, while Grace hummed a tune. Their voices and makeshift instruments blended into a simple symphony of love and acceptance. In reflecting on everything, Tom and Grace realized that while they had originally set out to save Oliver, it was Oliver who had, in many ways, saved them. His arrival had given them renewed purpose, and bridged gaps within their family. Their once distant children now visited regularly, united by a common love for their newest family member. Neighbors, touched by the Millers' compassion, discovered the sweetness of giving and supporting those in need. Even Charlie, once a frightened puppy from the landfill, became the family's protector, a living testament to the power of second chances. Life in Beattyville remained humble and at times challenging. Money was never abundant, and Grace and Tom still picked through the landfill when funds ran low. Yet their hearts were filled with a warmth that overshadowed every material hardship. With every milestone Oliver reached, his first words, his first steps, his first real attempt at singing, Grace and Tom felt renewed hope for the future. Some nights, after putting Oliver to bed, Grace would stand by his crib, remembering the day they first found him, cold, alone, seemingly discarded. In those moments, she would lean down and whisper, "We love you, Oliver. You are our miracle." If Oliver was half asleep, he might stir or even mutter a quiet, almost dreamy response. And Charlie, curled up at the foot of the crib, would open one eye, as if reassuring Grace that he too was watching over Oliver. How do you feel after listening to this story? What city are you listening in? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe and like before continuing with the next story on the channel.